Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be. My name is Peter Kasianchuk, and I'm an instructor with the Educational Services Group here in Redlands, California. And as you've heard, I'm joined today by Dr. Aileen Buckley, who is a cartographic researcher also here in the ESRI headquarters in Redlands. And I, too, would like to welcome you all to today's live training seminar, Making Better Maps with ArcGIS. This seminar will be divided into three topic areas. We'll start with a review of map and layout design principles, then a discussion of ArcMap methods to enhance or better control your map layouts, and a short section at the end which will review map output considerations. Each topic will include a software demonstration, a topic review, and a question and answer session. We'd like to try to get to as many of your questions as time allows, so if any of you already have a specific question that you would like to have answered, now would be a great time to enter it into the queue, and that way we can have a number of your questions answered and ready for that first Q&A session. This seminar will focus on map layout, but we do need to review some important map design concepts first. For example, before you even turn on your computer, you should take some time with a piece of paper and sketch out the basic layout of your map. This will help you look at your design as a whole. Two key concepts in cartography and map and layout design are: what are the effective and substantive design of your map or your layout? The effective design relates to the map document as a whole. You might consider this the more artistic set of decisions that you need to make. What is the look or feel of this map? And some examples are shown here. In the screenshot we've shown here, the effective design is to create an historic-looking map of the Columbia River watershed sometime during the mid-19th century. This is a modern map, but the effective design is to make it look old. Substantive design relates to the choices you make about what is shown on the map and why you put it there. What is the substance of your map or layout? For example, the colors you use, any font types, symbology, and the actual content of the information shown on the map. In this example, font types and the way that the border lines are treated are specific substantive design choices used to support the effective design of making this map look older. The main point of this first slide is to get you thinking about how all your subsequent layout design choices will support both of these overall concepts. And as I mentioned at the beginning, starting with a sketch on a piece of paper will really help you put these ideas in order. This seminar assumes that you already know what kind of map or maps you're going to include on your layout, and that you've spent a fair amount of time thinking about the answers to the questions shown here. And although they're really more focused on map design, the 4 points noted are important because they're part of creating a good map layout. Some examples of these considerations are: what is the map about? It might be thematic, or a reference map, or some kind of schematic map. Who is the map for? Your audience may be a very general one, the general public, for example, or a specifically technical audience. How will the map be used? Will it be used inside of a moving vehicle, under poor lighting conditions, or are you going to be using your layout on the internet? Which also moves into what are technical limits. The print device you choose, for example, may not have the same color range as your computer monitor. Or, as is the case here with this map and most of the maps you're going to see in this presentation, maps originally created for print will appear very differently if used on screen. If you would like to have more information on any of these map design topics, please complete the survey at the end of this seminar and let us know. Use the Give Us Feedback link. Let's move into layout design. One of the first things you need to start looking at is the overall balance of the map sheet. Once you have made your specific map design decisions, you move to the technical aspects of putting your decisions into practice, which is part of your substantive design. The first set of layout parameters to define are those which divide and allocate your page space. How you choose to arrange the various elements of your layouts will have a subtle but important influence on the success or failure of what your map is trying to communicate. For example, margins may be part of your technical considerations, as different printers have different page print limits. In this example, white space looks like there might be something missing in this corner and here. You may choose to use white space as an intentional object because your map reader's eyes will be drawn to various pieces of white space. But in this case, this looks like we haven't planned for it quite properly. Bounding boxes can make a substantial difference in how an object appears in your layout. Consider the fact that maps often have a white background, and without a bounding box, the map body may appear to be floating in space on your layout, which may be the effect you're after. But note the example here. The box at the top left-hand corner doesn't have a bounding box, and because it's that light gray, it doesn't appear as prominent as the other boxes on this layout that do have a bounding box. And finally, alignment. In this example, the unaligned elements are intentionally exaggerated, which helps to illustrate the concept that this layout feels a little unstable. Keep in mind that your map readers will notice even small differences in alignment, as small as 1 or 2 millimeters. But this will also depend on what your map is being used for. If it's being viewed from very far away, it might not be as obvious. But you can see how simple changes in some of these properties can improve the layout drastically. In this particular balanced layout now, the margins are more consistent and thus a little easier to read. The box at the top left-hand corner is considerably more visible since we put a bounding box on it. And the alignment of all the elements gives the layout generally more stability. You use a figure-ground relationship both within the map and as part of the map layout. A brief definition here is that the figure is that object which appears to be above or in front of some background. This is known as the ground and can be called the general underlying plane, on top of which the figure is placed. This can be both within a map or in your map layout. Within that map layout, the figure ground can be enhanced with techniques like adding a drop shadow around an element frame or the physical draw order of graphic elements on your page. In this particular example, this globe is the obvious figure, and it's been enhanced by the fact that you've got some lighting in here, a little bit of shading here, and a drop shadow, which really makes the figure pop out from the ground beneath. The background plane is the curvature of the Earth, which itself sits on top of another plane, which is the blackness of space. So we've got a couple of figure-ground relationships going on in this single map layout. Visual contrast is another design consideration that works both within a map and your map layout, particularly if your layout contains more than one map. You need to plan for and consider whether the symbols that you're using between your maps are visible, legible, and easily differentiated between maps. Can the map reader understand why you might be using one symbol palette over another or one set of color choices? In this example, the choices of greens and browns show a difference in elevation, which contrasts quite nicely with the bathymetric blues, which show lake depth. You can combine these techniques to then convey more information in your map or layout. Here, a change in color between the border of the Crater Lake National Park boundary inside and outside creates an enhanced figure ground effect. Visual hierarchy in a map layout is the intentional use of such characteristics as component size and position, bounded areas, or color schemes which you use to guide the map reader to those layout elements that you feel are most important. In this example, there's an obvious size progression between the three maps, as you can see here in this top map and these two bottom ones. The color schemes and symbology are all the same. Note, in fact, that a single legend refers to all three maps. However, the map author obviously wants you to pay more attention to the information contained within the map at the top. So this is an example of using visual hierarchy to draw the map reader's eye to the most important information, shown here. We'll be covering some technical details on how to manage a couple of these components in the second section of this seminar. Map components can also be called marginalia, map surrounds, or map elements, and include such common items as titles, legends, scale indicators, and north arrows. They are an important aspect of your overall layout design, and need to be planned for early in your layout creation. These components should help support the overall message of the map and should not necessarily be included automatically. For example, not all maps need a north arrow or scale indicator. However, all maps should have a title. Text blocks may present an issue if you need to add a lot of text and somehow fit that around various map information. Photographs and aerial photography can pose particular challenges in this regard, as they are often dark and may draw too much attention away from the main message of the map. This brings us to our first software demonstration, where I want to show you a couple of basic techniques that you can use to help lay out your original map. Now in this case, we have a fairly straightforward example of a map with a couple of data frames, some scale indicators, a block of text, which is a little bit lost in here. It appears just to be floating in space, and a graph. Now you can also see that I've intentionally exaggerated the fact that many of these elements are misaligned. I want to show you a simple thing that you can do using tools that you might not be familiar with to easily align multiple elements. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key on my keyboard and click on all four of these elements. Once I've done that, I'll right-click, and you can see that I've got a number of options here in this context menu. Here, I'm going to choose to align center. Let's take a look at what that does, and you can see now that all of those elements were lined up. You recall that this scale bar was a little bit to the left, and this scale bar was a little bit to the right, and the two edges here didn't match. We have now aligned all of these objects at once. One of the other options that you can use here is to perhaps align to the margins. In this case, aligning to the right. So that's one technique that you can use to easily enforce some alignment in your map layout and keep the lines nice and clean. Another option that you can use is to add guides. You do this by clicking on the guide marker here in your ruler space, and this blue line with a little arrow will automatically be added. Now in this case, it just so turns out that this data frame already lines up, but I want to use the overview map of the United States to line up to this one as well, so I'm simply going to drag it over and it'll snap to that guide. We'll review this briefly in the upcoming discussion in the second topic. What I also want to show you is that there is a context menu that you can access by right-clicking inside the ruler, which helps you control your guides. One of the other things that I want to show you is how easy it is to enhance your figure ground. As I mentioned before, this text box looks a little lost and it might be floating in space a little bit. So what I want to do is enhance its figure ground by changing the text box properties. The first thing that I want to do is add a little bit of a border or a bounding box. A very thin line, and I would encourage you not to use the default black color, but take advantage of the use of grayscale. I'm also going to round this off just a little bit by about 5% to soften some of the corners. I'll also add a drop shadow to give it a bit of a raised effect. Now I'm simply going to use the default settings here and click apply, and you can see that that default setting for the offset might be a little extreme for this size of map. So dial that down a little bit, because really what you want to try and do here is be subtle with your effects. I'm also going to match the rounding and click OK, and you can see that now this text has a little bit more of a presence in the bounding box. Those are a couple of basic techniques that you can use to enhance your layout by aligning various elements, by using the alignment context menu, the use of grids, and I also showed you an easy way that you can enhance your figure ground. One other technique that I want to show you is a tool that you might not be familiar with, but that has been available with ArcGIS since version 8.3, and that's this button here called the eyedropper. You can add this to your toolbar by going to the Customize menu, going to the Commands tab, and these are all alphabetical now, so I'll scroll down to the Page Layout category. Inside of the Page Layout category, you can go to Eyedropper. There it is right there, and I already clicked and dragged it to my toolbar. What this tool will do is sample the pixel value in RGB, or red, green, blue values. So in this case, I'd like to take the yellow fill that's being used here for Montana and actually use it as a background fill for this data frame. It's a nice yellow, but I'm not sure what the color is or what its name might be, so I simply want to click on it and sample it. You can see that the eyedropper returns an RGB value here. I'll click OK, and I'll show you a couple of things that happen. First of all, going to my paint bucket on my draw toolbar, you'll see that that color has been added. So when I right-click on that data frame, go to Properties, and the Fill Colors, that's the wrong context menu. Well, we'll go to Frame. There we go. The background fill, I need to add a color. You'll see that that color choice is also available here. So using the eyedropper tool is useful for matching colors between data frames or even between maps. Because what also happens is that this gets stored as part of your default styles. So I want to show you a little bit about how to manage the eyedropper colors from Style Manager. So I went to my Tools pull-down menu, Style Manager, and when I clicked OK from my eyedropper, that color that I had sampled was automatically added to this color palette here. And as you can see from earlier demos today, I already added this. I also renamed them. This is a way that you can start developing your own color palette for any number of uses for your layout needs. Keep in mind that they're going to be stored inside a default folder here under Documents and Settings under your personal profile. There's also the extensive list of different styles stored under the esri.style file, and here's that default color set that you're probably all used to. So that's the end of the first software demo. Let's return to our presentation, do a brief topic review, and then move on to some of your questions. We started off discussing effective and substantive design and some of the differences there, a brief review of map design considerations, but then more detail on map layout design, and I hope the distinction between those two is clear. We talked about balance, the figure-ground relationships, and how to use visual contrast and visual hierarchy to enhance your layout. We also briefly reviewed a few map components. Now I'd like to turn it over to Aileen to answer some of your questions.
Thanks, Peter. We have a question from Libby in Phoenix who wants to know if she can use the eyedropper tool to get the color of an area that's a result of transparencies. For example, a polygon overlaid on an air photo or an elevation tint overlaid on a hillshade. And yes, it works exactly the same for the overlaid colors and tints. We also have a question from Brian in Fresno who wants to know if there are plans for ArcGIS to support multiple layouts in the future. We don't have this capability right now, and you won't see it in 9.2 when it's released, but this is certainly something that we're working on for development in future releases. We have a question from Tess in Washington, D.C. who wants to know, how do I get the Crater Lake National Park, the look in the Crater Lake National Park that you had, where there was a muted look outside the park boundary? To create that effect, we created a polygon that was the area outside the park. Then we set the polygon fill color to white and the transparency to about 50%. You can also set the transparency of a single feature in a layer. Say, for example, we had a polygon coverage or polygon layer, and there was one feature in that was the national park. For that particular feature in that layer, you could set the transparency different from the other features. And to do that, you would go to the Layers, Properties, and in the Symbology tab, at the bottom right, look for a little button that's called Advanced. If you click on it, you'll see that there's an option to pick Transparency. And when you click on that, you will find that there is an indication to identify a field in your layer that has a transparency value that's based on %. So be sure to add that transparency field value to your layer first. And finally, we have a question from Lance in Apple Valley who wants to know how we got that faded boundary look that was on the historic map we showed. You can create that effect using something that's called a coastal vignette, which essentially uses a series of buffered rings, and you set the colors and optionally the transparencies of them to give you that faded out look for the boundary. The step-by-step instructions for this are available on our knowledge base website, and there's a technical article there called What Are Coastal Vignettes and How Can I Create Them? So look for the information in that article. Okay, Peter?
Thank you, Aileen, and please keep your questions coming. In this topic section, we will discuss methods you use in ArcMap to support your layout design decisions. First, we'll review page property settings, then a couple of data frame properties. We'll look at how to manage layout text and graphics, and last, review the ArcMap Advanced Settings utility. One of the first things you should do in ArcMap, perhaps even before you move to your layout view, is set up your page snapping and alignment environment. These are settings that are part of the ArcMap application options. That's the dialog shown here, which you can access from the Tools pull-down menu. These settings are stored within the map document or map template as part of the layout parameters. And what we're showing you here are the default settings for things such as page units, ruler size, grid mesh size, and snapping elements. One of the things that I would like to point out here is in this bottom section, if you turn on more than one element, you can actually define the order in which elements will be snapped to whatever of these you've turned on. Because we've only got one selected here, this is the default, these black arrows aren't enabled. So once you've set these, you then move to Layout View and use those guides and grids to help align your map components. And that's what we showed you in the previous software demonstration. As you have also just seen, you can use these grids and guides to align and distribute page elements by invoking the context menu when you've selected multiple graphic elements on your layout view. You can use these by right-clicking, and you'll see this list here. Or you can use the graphics toolbar. The graphics toolbar is available with the core set of toolbars available in ArcMap at all license levels, and it's been there for a couple of versions. What's contained on this toolbar here are all the choices that are contained within this context menu, but exposed so that you don't have to go through a couple of right clicks and perhaps clutter up your map display. So you have a section here on distribute. That's what's being shown in here. Moving on to data frame properties. The data frame properties include many settings that you can use to support your layout design. One example is to clip a data frame. As shown in this example, there may be times when your layout will need to include oddly shaped extents, non-rectangular that is, or areas that are too widely spaced to fit within a single data frame. In this example, we've got a map of the continental US, and at that scale, Alaska and Hawaii simply wouldn't appear. So we brought in Alaska and Hawaii, but we needed to clip them both so that we wouldn't obscure any information here or in here if we just had a simple rectangle. We'll show you how to do this in the upcoming software demonstration. Map reference grids and graticules should be considered early in your layout design process. As you can see from the bottom left-hand corner of this image, they can present a design challenge if you're choosing to use more than one. You'll note that we have some text overwriting here, and the color might be interfering. With intentional design and some planning beforehand, grids and graticules can add much more information and functionality to your layout. In this example, the gray bars of the reference grid neat line correspond to 100-meter and 200-foot increments. So not only are they a nice graphical technique, they also add additional information and functionality to the layout. You can add extent rectangles within an overview map to clearly define the spatial relationships between data frames. Now these are dynamic elements. Should you need to move or reposition the view extent of either data frame, the extent rectangle will move accordingly. What this image is showing you is that although they're called rectangles, these are in fact georeferenced objects and will draw the accurate spatial extent of the data frame. In this case, the overview map of Europe, shown here, is projected in an Albers equal area conic projection, while the main map, the detail map, is in the French National Lambert conformal conic projection. As a result, the extent data frame here is slightly rotated and a little bit wider at the south end than it is at the north end, which accurately reflects the spatial extent of the detail map. You also have full graphic control over the line weight, thickness, and color of this box. Bright red might not be appropriate for your purposes. Talking about layout, text, and graphics, where text or annotation is based on geographic features, you're obviously limited in your text placement options because you generally want to associate text with their geographic objects, and you manage these most of the time in the ArcMap data view. With layout text, however, you have a little more flexibility. You can place single lines of text or paragraph blocks wherever best suits your design needs, and you can take advantage of areas in the layout that don't contain important map information. As shown in this example, where we've put some text elements out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, this is the coastline of California, and we can add additional information to our map. You can do this by using the ArcMap Draw Toolbar tool called New Polygon Text, which allows you to draw the outline of an irregular polygon shape and then wrap text within it. And we'll show you how to do this in the upcoming software demonstration. I wonder if this has ever happened to any of you, where you've added some text to your layout view and then you've needed to change the scale or the extent of your data frame, and now all of your text is misaligned. A show of hands? Of course, this has happened to a few of you. You can add text or graphics to your layout referenced to one of two coordinate systems. That is to say, the data frame units or the page units. And by default, when you add graphic elements to your map, they're in page units. However, by adding text when the data frame is in focus, you can tie the location of the graphic element to that map coordinate space. Then, when you move your map data frame, the text will move along with it. And this works the same for either text elements or graphics. And we'll also show you how to do this in the upcoming software demonstration. Earlier in this section, we discussed page layout grids and snapping elements that you should set before you even start moving to layout view. Recall that these settings are saved as part of the MXD or MXT properties and may not persist into new layouts when you relaunch ArcMap. You may want to change some ArcMap default settings to support common specific map layout needs in a more permanent way. You can do this easily by using the ArcMap Advanced Settings utility. I'll take a moment for you to read the rather long list of things you can set here. As you can see, you can set a wide range of defaults for ArcMap that will persist every time you relaunch the application. This utility is installed as part of the default ArcGIS product installation and is typically stored in the path that is shown on the slide. So I encourage you to go and explore that interface. Wait till the end of the live training seminar and take a look at some of the settings that you can take a look at there. This brings us to our second software demonstration, where I want to take a look at treating text and clipping a data frame. So there's the example that we saw earlier in the slide. One of the first things that I want to do is georeference the text and show you how you can do that. Now in this case, we'll start with the default behavior. I'll zoom in on the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to add some spline text. Nice curve here. Let's try this again. Double click. Well, this is interesting. It's new behavior every time. There we go. And the sound of typing over the internet. I'm going to right-click over that because I want to make this text look a little more oceany. And I'll change this to one of the default lists that we have here of ocean text, where we've got some settings for default font styles and types and spacing and such. I'm going to click OK, and you can see that now I've got some nice Pacific Ocean text out there with a nice curve. But let's say I need to pan or zoom my map, and I need to include some additional information. You'll see that as I zoom over, the Pacific Ocean text hasn't moved from the page units that it was put into, and now it lies on top of California, which is not the behavior that we want. I'm going to zoom back to my previous extent and delete that text. I'm going to make one significant change. Click the Focus Data Frame button here on my Layout toolbar, and you'll see now that it's got this hatched outline. I'm going to do the same thing adding the same spline text, give it that gentle curve. There we go. I won't go through changing the font element. We've seen, well, I should be cartographically consistent, and so I will. But it's not working in this case. So in that case now I'm simply going to pan my map, and you can see that as I zoom and pan, that Pacific Ocean text is now georeferenced, and it's staying where we put it. That was as a result of moving the data frame from just a graphic space into the focus data frame space. So let's zoom back out to our full extent. The next thing that I want to do is show you how to treat paragraph blocks using that new paragraph text tool that we discussed earlier. In this particular case, we've got some space in here in Nevada that we can use to embed or add additional text elements and more information to our map. So I'm going to draw an irregular shape that corresponds to the map boundary between Nevada and California. I'm going to right-click and open its properties. Now I happen to have a text document already open so you don't have to watch me do a lot of typing. So I'm going to do a quick copy and paste. Quick copy and paste. Maybe it won't be so quick. There we go. I'm going to move this off to the side a little bit so that you can see what's going on here, and click Apply. And you can see that as I pasted the text in here, it now wraps around that original polygon as I drew it. One of the things that you might take a look at is that on your map, all of these long lines of text might be difficult for your map readers to read. So one of the things you can change is the default number of columns from 1 to 2. Let's see what that looks like. That's not bad. But you can start to play around with this default settings here. I might want to make that gap just a little bit larger. Click Apply there. One of the other things you'll notice is that the justification is full, so I've got some unusual gaps in here, so I'll move back to text, change my justification to left, click Apply. That looks a little cleaner. I'm also going to zoom in on my map use of that eyedropper tool. This might happen to you where currently the text box doesn't have a background, and the border lines are actually showing through those text elements, which interferes with both the map information and the text information. So one of the things that I might use my eyedropper for is to sample the color, click OK, then move to the properties of the text box, change that frame color to the sample that I just had. First I need to add a color, and then I can go to the color palette and use that sample that I got from eyedropper. Click OK, and now what I've got is a kind of a halo effect, or what looks like it might be a transparent background because I matched the color to this solid fill. One of the other things that I should point out is that I drew a somewhat irregular polygon here, which I might need to change at some point because for one reason or another. You can press this button to edit the vertices of that particular shape. So I was using that tool down there. I can now edit this text box by using this. I'm going to delete this text box right now because the next thing that I want to show you is how to clip the data frame. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Before clipping the data frame, the first thing that you need to do, and it's quite important, is make sure that you're actually working with a focus data frame. So again, in this case, I only have the one data frame, so I don't need to worry about that too much, but you might have layouts with multiple data frames. Now what I want to do is clip this data frame to a particular graphic. In this case, I'm going to start with, and this will be a multi-step process, I'm going to start with a regular rectangle. Now in this case, a regular rectangle might have the same appearance as just zooming in. As I mentioned, this is a two-step process because what I want to do is now clip out this section in here using another graphic shape, which I can then draw on top of the existing graphic shape. That was why I changed the fill so that I could see what I was doing. I'm now going to hold down my Shift key, select them both, and right-click. And hopefully I'll get a graphic menu here which will allow me to do a subtraction. Go back to making sure that that's the... There we go. Under graphic operations, one of the options that I have here is to subtract. What's showing you here is that the graphic object with the green handles is the subordinate object, and the graphic object with the blue handles is the the parent object. So I'm going to subtract that second one from the first one. So now what I've got is my outline of the graphic that I want to use to clip my data frame. I can then move to the data frame properties, go to the data frame tab, move to the bottom and enable the clip to shape functionality. Specify that shape, and you'll see that I've got three options here. One is the outline of features, where I could actually bring in any number of existing feature class layers to clip my data frame. But the example that I'm showing you here is the outline of the selected graphics. Custom extent simply allows you to define a specific rectangle in a coordinate system. But here the outline of selected graphics is what I want to show you. I'm also going to give this a nice thick border to show you what's going on. Click OK, and you can see now that that data frame is clipped to the output. The background I will need to change so that I don't have a blue fill all over everything. Click OK. No color. And there's a clipped data frame. Okay, that's the end of our second demo. Let's do a quick topic review and also give you a review question. Please locate the link Review Question on the upper left-hand corner of your browser window and click it now. And here's our review question. This refers back to basically the first slide. Which decisions are part of effective layout design? Are they page size and layout orientation? Decisions of, is the map layout open, crowded, light, or dark? What is your map about? Or D, what font sets, color palettes, or line weights do you want to use? We'll come back to the answers of this after we get to some more of your questions. So in this section, we reviewed some ArcMap techniques that you can use to support your layout design decisions, such as page properties, grids, guides, spacings, etc. Some data frame properties, such as how to clip a data frame, how to treat layout text and graphics so that they are referenced to your data frame or your page units. And we reviewed something called the ArcMap Advanced Settings utility. This brings us to some more questions. Aileen?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Peter. We have Marco in the Netherlands who wants to know if you can also get CMYK values when you use the eyedropper tool. Well, there's no way to change the color model that's used to specify the color in the eyedropper tool, but as Peter mentioned, those colors are stored in your personal style. So if you open up the Style Manager by clicking on Tools on the top bar menu, then Styles, and then Style Manager, when you click on Colors and select any of the colors there, you can right-click and see its properties, and here you can change the color model. Up at the top, there's a little drop-down arrow. You could change the default RGB to either CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or HSV, which is hue, saturation, and value. And once you change that color model, the new values will appear. Now remember, though, that the name itself is already specified just as a number for RGB values. We also have Robert in Spokane Valley who asks, can you share styles between users? And yes, you can. A style is displayed in your workspace as just a .style file in the location that you save it to, or in the default locations, as is the case with your personal style. To share that with your colleagues, simply copy it, send it to them, and they can easily reference it from the Style Manager. So that information is shareable among users. We also have a question from Brian in Fresno who wants to know what's the best way to create a multi-page map series. Right now, the best solution is to create a template ArcMap document from your ArcMap document that sets the layout and marginalia. Then use the layers to consistently symbolize from different data sources within the map series. And I'll end with a question from Grace in Austin, who wants to know, how do you add extent rectangles? It's really pretty simple. You need to have two data frames, one that's larger than the other, so you can see where the smaller one is within the parent data frame. And then for the parent data frame, right-click on its name, select its properties, and click on the tab that's called Extent Rectangle. What you'll see there is a list of all other data frames in your map document. Select the one that you want to identify with an extent rectangle in the larger data frame, click the arrow over button, and then click OK. Now before you click OK, if you want to change the properties of that frame, it's real simple. Just click on the frame button and change its properties. So Peter?
Thanks, Aileen. Okay, I'm looking at the answer bar for our review question. And the answer that we were actually looking for what decisions are part of effective layout design was B. You may recall on the first slide, we were looking at what is the effective design and gave you some examples such as historical, modern, and included things that might also be called light or dark. So that's the answer we were looking for effective layout design. The other options, page size and layout orientation, the substance of your map or what your map is about, font sets, color palettes, and line weights are really more part of your substantive layout design decisions. But thanks for ringing in. This brings us to our last topic section, map output. Now that you've spent a fair amount of time to create a professional looking layout, you want to make sure that your work looks the same in its final form as it does currently in ArcMap. ArcMap provides you with three output options for map layouts. One is to print directly from the ArcMap application. Another is to export that map to an external file format that some other applications might use. You can also copy the map to clipboard, and this is a menu choice from the File menu in ArcMap, which allows you to copy that to the Windows operating system clipboard and simply paste it into another Windows-based application document. Another method you should also take advantage of, if you don't already, and we've mentioned these a few times, is to store your layout as a map template or a .mxt file. What this will do is preserve your alignment, page alignment, and any elements that any graphical elements that you may have added, such as north arrows, scale bars, etc. And you can reuse that and simply change the content within the map body themselves. Outside of ArcMap, you can use the Publisher extension product to create something called a PMF file. This is a compressed version of the map document, which provides you with the option of also including the actual map data embedded and bundled within that PMF. You can also publish the ArcMap MXD file to the internet through the use of the ArcIMS product. And there's lots more information on these two, both in our help files and on our product pages at esri.com. Regardless of which of these output methods you choose, you will need to examine and define some set of parameters. Each output option requires different considerations. Printer settings, for example, are different between devices, and these will need to be examined and reset if your map is sent to different computers or printers. As we're showing here, we've got at least two different drivers available for sending your print from ArcMap. The Windows is the default print driver that comes with your operating system. ArcPress is now available at all license levels of ArcGIS at version 9.1, and it's got some specific characteristics that we'll review in the upcoming software demonstration. The PostScript driver you may have seen from time to time in our product information is only available with printers that already have the PostScript software loaded onto them. You can choose to export your layout to any of 11 different file formats. Each has a slightly different set of output parameters, which I encourage you to investigate. We'll also show you some of these in the upcoming software demonstration. Some file formats have advantages over others, depending on what use your map layout is intended to have. For example, SVG is a raster format, which is really nice for posting to the internet. So is JPEG or bitmap, etc. PDF is a good way to save file space and share your map document, and the .ai extension allows you to preserve layers and do other kinds of vector editing outside of ArcMap if you need to do that. One important issue that you should be aware of for any output is what happens to transparent layers when your layout is sent to output. And this rule applies as to whether you're printing directly from ArcMap or exporting to some file format. Any transparent layers, and that includes any layers drawn beneath those transparent layers, will be converted to raster on output. This means, in effect, that any line features or text that are underneath your transparency may be pixelated, as it were, and look blurry. You might lose those sharp edges on your text elements or the nice straight lines being shown underneath the transparency. In addition, this may inflate the size of the output file, particularly if the layout has large areas covered with transparency, which may slow down your map export or printing. This is something that you should be aware of. We'll show you a setting in the next software demonstration which you might use to help reduce this if it's a problem for you. So, that moves us to our last software demonstration, a brief review of some of the dialogues that you use for output. So let's first move to the page and print setup. In this case, I want to set up a default generic printer. The straightforward purpose of this dialog is for you to confirm that the printer settings and the map are literally on the same page. Because until the time that you actually go to print your layout, your map units and page size can be anything you want them to be in ArcMap. However, once you select a print device, you need to confirm that your map settings are even possible. For example, page sizes in your map layout might not be supported on a particular printer. So the printer information is loaded in here in this paper section. And what we've got are the printer properties being read in from your Windows operating system for, in this case, a generic Windows printer. That's where this page size library is being read from. So it's actually the printer settings that are available here. Your map settings, on the other hand, until you check this box, could be anything that you want. Now, it just turns out that our map document happens to be 8.5 by 11. But let's say that we wanted to change the orientation. You actually get a dynamic interface in here which shows you the changes of what's going on between your settings. Currently, we have independent behavior between the paper size on the printer and my map page size. By checking on Use Printer Paper Settings, a couple of things happen. First of all, you'll notice that I can no longer change the actual page size. It's going to be read in from these paper settings. What you've also got is Show Printer Margins on Layout. And this is an important setting to have. You can move back to Layout View and make sure that your map information isn't somewhere within boundaries that might not be printed. So that's a basic review of the page and print setup. It's really quite a straightforward interface. The next thing that we want to take a look at is print. Once you've set up your printer settings, you now have a couple of choices about what to do with your printer. And I want to point out some differences here on just this area right in here. By default, the printer engine that we've selected is ArcPress Printer, but I want to show you what's going on with the Windows printer and the Properties button. As you can see, the Windows printer properties are simply those that we saw in the earlier dialog being read in directly from the printer. What this means is that your Windows operating system is just using the defaults that you've set. On the other hand, should you choose to use the ArcPress printer, the properties change. As you can see, you need to select a color driver. Now in this case, we don't have a Hewlett-Packard printer. We have an extensive library of Hewlett-Packard color management options, and you'll need to set this here. You can also select a default screen resolution, and I would caution you against going too high. This may result in a very large output file. You've also got the color adjustment tab, which is really for expert use only. I should also mention this quality, or the output image quality section, which defines the resampling ratio should your map layout have any raster information, either raster data, imagery, or, as we've just mentioned, any transparent layers. This is an important note. You may notice that your file gets very large when you go to output, even if you don't have any rasters. It might be because you have transparencies, and it might be possible that you've dialed up your quality image resampling to 1:1, which is really meant for extremely high-end printing. What this is essentially saying is that every pixel in your raster is going to be included in that output file, and it may result in something very large. So there's a trade-off there. You might need to sacrifice a small amount of quality, which you might not even see on your printer, for a smaller file size. So those are the only two things that I really wanted to show you here. It's really all about trying to preserve the layout properties that you've spent so much time on in ArcMap. The third output option that we were discussing, or one of the other output options we were discussing, was exporting your map. I want to take a look at a couple of settings. I've simply expanded the options key here. And here's the list of file types that you can use to export to. We're simply going to take a look at the properties of a couple of the more commonly used ones. For example, PDF. Now, how many times have those of you who have exported to PDF had your map opened by some other destination computer and the map doesn't look right? The symbols don't look right, the font hasn't printed properly. Show of hands? Yes, I'm sure this has happened to a few of you. What's going on here is that with ArcMap, it may be drawing on symbol sets or font types that are defaults installed with ArcGIS. And when you export your PDF and send it to another computer that doesn't have ArcGIS, it may not have that font library available. The setting under the Format tab that you want to pay attention to here is Embed All Document Fonts. By default, this is off. If you're going to be exporting to PDF, make sure you check this on. What it means is that any of the symbol fonts or text fonts that you might have used that are specific to ArcGIS will be embedded in the PDF. It won't inflate your file size very much, but what it will ensure is that anybody who opens the PDF on another machine that doesn't have ArcGIS will have the map look exactly as you intended. Another file export format that I want to bring your attention to is the TIFF, which has a couple of special choices on it. You can write a world file, or if you're exporting to GeoTIFF, you can write GeoTIFF tags. Now you'll notice that these are grayed out, and this is the reason that I point this out here. This will be enabled if you are exporting your map from data view, because the coordinates are going to be read in from the data view values. Okay, that's really all I wanted to review with this particular software demo, was just a couple of things on the output considerations. This is a fairly brief topic. We didn't want to get too far into print and troubleshooting there, but we wanted to make you aware of a couple of things that you need to consider when you're moving to getting your layout out of ArcMap. Aileen, do we have any more questions?
Oh yeah, we have some really good ones here, Peter. We've got Sherry in Salt Lake City who wants to know about rotating a data frame. She says, I'm making a large-scale map of Honolulu and I want the shoreline to be parallel to the bottom of the page instead of the default north is up. How can I rotate the data frame? Well, what you want to do is on the View menu on the top bar, point to Toolbars and click Data Frame Tools. And here, there is a data frame rotation tool. So you can either interactively choose to rotate the data frame, or you can type in a rotation value. And then once you've typed in the rotation value, you have the option of using one of the other buttons on that toolbar, which is to clear the rotation. Now, rotating the data frame in this manner doesn't alter the original source data, just the way it's displayed in the data frame. A couple of things I want to add to that is that any of the graphics that you added in a focused data frame, Peter showed you this earlier where you double-click the data frame and you get that sort of hatched border, anything you added while the data frame was focused will rotate with the data frame. If you added graphics or text that was not during a focused data frame, that won't rotate when you rotate the data frame. One other thing I want to mention about that is for any marker symbols or other text, make sure to check out the advanced ArcMap settings to enable an option to rotate them when you rotate the data frame, because the default is that they won't rotate with a rotated data frame. Now that brings us to a second question, which is from Charles in Fulton, who wanted us to remind him and you where to find the Advanced ArcMap Settings utility. So what you need to do is go to Program Files, then ArcGIS, then Utilities, and you'll find that Advanced ArcMap Settings. Okay, we also have a question from Karen in British Columbia who wants to know if she can use advanced settings that I was just talking about to set a default text style. And no, you can't, because there are too many different places where you would have that default text style coming in. But you can set default properties for graphic text. To do that, what you need to do on the drawing toolbar, next to the word drawing, there's an arrow down. Click on that, and the bottom option is default symbol properties. If you click on that, there's an option to set the symbol defaults for any text symbology you add. This is graphic text. So just click on that symbol, set the properties to be what you want, and any text you add will now be using that default setting. While you're in this dialog, take a look around because you can also set default marker, line, fill, and even call-out symbology. So you may want to change some other things while you're in there as well. We have a question from Brian in Oregon who wants to know if you can use different text effects in a text block, and the answer is yes. To do that, what you're going to use is something called a formatting text tag. So once you've added a block of text, in the text properties dialog, if you look down in the bottom left-hand side, you'll see a little box that says about formatting text. If you click on that, you'll get a whole bunch of information about how to use these formatting text tags, and here's a simple hint. Just copy and paste from that little open dialog window to make your job a little bit easier when you're formatting your own text. We also have a question from Jonathan in Boston who wants to know if we support PDF layers, and right now we don't, but we are considering this for future development. And I'll end with a question from Charlie in Kansas who wants to know about setting the line widths and the text sizes and then coming out funny after exporting. He says, I had 9-point fonts and now I have 8.92 or something strange like that. Why is that happening and what do I do? Instead of exporting at the default 360 DPI, 300 DPI, use 360 DPI or any number that's divisible by 72, and then when you export, all those values should be okay. Okay, Peter?
Thank you, Aileen, and thank you for some excellent questions. For more information, we have a number of sources. The virtual campus course Cartographic Design using ArcGIS 9 is a good place to start. We also have a 3-day instructor-led training course called Cartography with ArcGIS, which goes into a lot of this in more detail. 2 books that I personally can highly recommend, Designing Better Maps, a user guide for the GIS user by Cynthia Brewer, and Making Maps, a visual guide to map design for GIS. Both of these are published earlier this year. Excellent sources both. Aileen has also mentioned on a couple of occasions the support site Basemap Data Model link, which has a lot of good information on some of the techniques that you've seen here, in addition to other cartographic principles. We hope you enjoyed today's seminar, and on behalf of ESRI, I'd like to thank you all for attending.